Do we have one brain or two? Today, we are going to talk about the question that has intrigued scientists and philosophers for centuries. You might think that the answer is obvious. We have one brain, of course. But what if I tell you that our brain is actually divided into two halves, called hemispheres, and that each hemisphere has its own functions, abilities, and even personality? Sounds strange, right? Well, not so fast. In this video, I will show you some evidence and logic that support the idea that we have two brains in one skull. But before we start, if you did not subscribe yet, please hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. Let's get started. First, let's take a look at the anatomy of the brain. The brain is composed of many different parts, but the largest and most visible part is the cerebrum, which is responsible for most of our cognitive functions, such as thinking, learning, memory, language, and perception. The cerebrum is divided into two hemispheres, connected by a thick band of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum allows the two hemispheres to communicate and coordinate with each other. However, the two hemispheres are not identical. They have different structures and functions, and they process information differently. For example, the left hemisphere is usually dominant for language, logic, and analytical thinking, while the right hemisphere is usually dominant for creativity, spatial awareness, and emotional expression. The left hemisphere also controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body. This means that each hemisphere has its own perspective and interpretation of reality. To illustrate this point, let me show you some examples of how the two hemispheres can disagree or conflict with each other. One way to study the differences between the two hemispheres is to examine people who have had their corpus callosum damaged. This is a rare surgical procedure that is sometimes performed to treat severe cases of epilepsy. By cutting the connection between the two hemispheres, the seizures are reduced or stopped. However, this also creates a condition known as split brain syndrome. Split brain patients have two separate brains that cannot communicate with each other. This leads to some bizarre and fascinating behaviors and phenomena. For example, split brain patients can perform different tasks with each hand simultaneously and independently. They can also draw different pictures with each hand at the same time. This shows that each hemisphere has its own motor skills and preferences. Another example of split brain behavior is related to vision. Split brain patients can only verbally report what they see in their right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere. They cannot verbally report what they see in their left visual field, which is processed by the right hemisphere. However, they can point to or draw what they see in their left visual field with their left hand. This shows that each hemisphere has its own visual perception and recognition. Let me explain this with the word completion experiment on split brain patients. This experiment was a test of the ability of each hemisphere to complete words based on partial cues. The experiment was conducted by Gazzaniga and colleagues in the 1960s and 1970s. The procedure was as follows. The split brain patients were shown a word fragment in the center of a screen. They were instructed to complete the word by saying the first word that came to their mind. The word fragment was then flashed briefly to either the left or the right visual field, which corresponded to the right or the left hemisphere, respectively. The patients were asked to report what they saw and what word they completed. The results showed that, when the word fragment was presented to the left visual field, the patients could not say what they saw, but they could point to a picture of an apple with their left hand. This indicated that the right hemisphere could process visual information and access semantic memory, but it lacked speech production. When the word fragment was presented to the right visual field, the patients could say what they saw and what word they completed, such as apple. This indicated that the left hemisphere could process visual information, access semantic memory, and produce speech. When the word fragment was presented to both visual fields simultaneously, the patients reported seeing two different words, such as apple and staple. This indicated that each hemisphere completed the word independently, and without communication with the other hemisphere. The experiment demonstrated that the two hemispheres of a split brain patient had different linguistic abilities and that they could operate separately, and sometimes in conflict with each other. Sperry and Gazzaniga collaborated with Vogel and Bogan to study JW and other split-brain patients using their novel methods. They discovered that the two hemispheres of a split-brain patient had different abilities, preferences, and personalities, and that they could not share information or coordinate actions. The moral judgment experiment in split-brain patients was done by using non-linguistic morality plays, which are short animations that depict moral scenarios involving intentional or accidental harms. The researchers showed these animations to the left and right hemispheres of a split-brain patient named JW, who had his corpus callosum severed to treat his epilepsy. By presenting the stimuli to one visual field at a time, the researchers could isolate the processing of each hemisphere. After watching each animation, JW was asked to rate the moral wrongness of the action on a scale of 1 to 7. 1 means, not wrong at all, and 7 means, very wrong. He responded by pointing to a number on a card with his left or right hand, depending on which hemisphere was tested. The researchers found that the right hemisphere of JW was sensitive to the intentions of the agents in the animations, and rated intentional harms as more wrong than accidental harms. The left hemisphere of JW, however, was insensitive to intentions and rated harms based on outcomes, regardless of whether they were intentional or accidental. The experiment demonstrated that the right hemisphere is not only necessary but also sufficient for intent-based moral judgment, while the left hemisphere relies more on outcome-based moral judgment. This suggests that the right hemisphere has a specialized role in reasoning about mental states, which is crucial for moral evaluation. These examples demonstrate that split-brain patients have two distinct brains that operate independently, and sometimes in opposition to each other. They also suggest that each brain has its own personality and identity. In fact, some split-brain patients have reported feeling like they have two selves or minds inside their head. So what does this mean for us? Do we also have two selves or minds? Well, not exactly. Most of us have a normal corpus callosum that allows our two hemispheres to communicate and integrate with each other. We have a unified sense of self and a coherent view of reality. However, this does not mean that our two hemispheres are always in harmony or agreement. Sometimes, we may experience conflicts or contradictions between our rational and intuitive sides, or between our logical and creative sides. For example, you may have experienced a situation where you had to make a difficult decision between two options. One option may appeal more to your left brain, while the other option may appeal more to your right brain. You may feel torn or confused about which option to choose. You may also experience cognitive dissonance when your beliefs or actions do not match your values or feelings. These situations show that we are not always consistent or coherent in our thoughts and behaviors. We may have different aspects or facets of ourselves that are influenced by our two hemispheres. We may also switch between different modes or styles of thinking depending on the context or situation. Therefore, we can say that we have one brain with two modes of processing information, a left brain mode and a right brain mode. These modes are complementary and interdependent, and they help us to adapt and cope with different challenges and opportunities in life. We need both modes to function optimally and to achieve a balance between reason and intuition, analysis and synthesis, and order and chaos. So, to answer the question, do we have one brain or two? The answer is, we have both. We have one brain that is divided into two hemispheres, and we have two brains that are connected by one corpus callosum. We have one self that is composed of two aspects, and we have two selves that are integrated by one consciousness. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new about your brain and yourself. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos like this. Also, let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions for future videos. Thank you for watching.